Hello. What I would like to do in these videos is solve application problems involving quadratic equations. And we have a problem-solving strategy. Step 1, we should read the problem thoroughly. Make sure all words and ideas are understood. Sometimes you have to read the problem several times to make sure you understand what's going on. Step 2, we want to identify what we're looking for. If we're looking for area, we need to identify that. If we're looking for the length of a side, we need to identify that. We could possibly be looking for height. Step 3, name what we were looking for. So you want to choose a variable to represent what you're looking for. You could always use X if you want to, but sometimes using H for height or W for width would be a good idea. Step 4, translate into an equation. It says it may be helpful to restate the problem in one sentence with all the important information, then translate the English sentence into an algebra equation. So sometimes that's the hardest step, and we're going to work on that and practice that. Step 5, we want to solve the equation using good algebra techniques. And so the majority of the problems that we do, actually in this video, all of them that we do will end up being quadratic equations. And if you'll recall, you know how to solve quadratic equations. There are 3 methods. You could factor, if that's possible. You could use the square root property, again, if that's possible. Or you could use the quadratic formula, which is possible for every quadratic equation. Step 6, check the answer in the problem. Make sure it makes sense. If you get a negative answer when you're talking about the length of a side, you know something's wrong. So you should always look at your answer in the context of your problem that you're trying to solve. And finally, step 7, answer the question with a complete sentence. That's something we always forget to do, but it's a really good idea. All right, our first problem, the product of 2 consecutive odd integers is 99. Find the integers. All right, so first of all, again, the product of 2 consecutive odd integers. Now, everybody knows what an integer is. So you're talking about a positive or a negative number. Integers include both. Odd integers means like a 1, a 3, a 5, a 7, a 9, right? So, you know, I'll make a list. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. That's just an example of odd integers. Okay. Consecutive means they're next to each other. So, for example, 5 and 7 are consecutive odd integers because they are next to each other. Now it tells me that the product of these odd integers, so right here, the product of these odd integers is 99. And you know, product means multiply. So keep that in mind. That's something else we're going to have to deal with. Product means multiply. Okay, so we've got to find a way to write this down, what we're trying to say, and we need our variable. So we're trying to multiply 2 consecutive odd integers together. If the first one, why don't we just call it n? You could call it n, you could call it x, you could call it any letter you want. N is often used to represent an integer, so that's why I chose n. So if n is the first one, so I'm going to say that's my first one, then the question is how do I write the second one? Now notice the pattern. These are all 2 apart. You agree? Like 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7. So consecutive odd integers are 2 apart. So the next one would be n plus 2. So I don't even know what the first one is. See, I don't know it's 5. That means the second one's 7. Or the first one could be 9. The next one would be 11. But I don't know what the first one is. So if I call the first one n, the second one's n plus 2. Right? Now it says to multiply these together. So it's going to be n times n plus 2. And I know the answer to that is 99. Okay? So again, that's the hardest part of solving these things, is getting this set up. So again, product, go back and read it, the product of two consecutive odd integers is 99. So anytime you deal with consecutive integers, think about the list. Consecutive means they're right next to each other. So it would be n, and the next one's n plus 1. But since it said consecutive odd integers, if the first one's n, the next one is n plus 2. What if it said, let's think about this, what if it could say consecutive even integers? Just in case. What if it said consecutive even integers, right? If we call the first one n, what would the next one be? What if I told you n plus 2 again? Well, makes sense, right? Even numbers are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay? Then how far apart are these? If the first one's 2, then I would add 2 to get to the next one. Or if the first one's 8, I would add 2 to get to the next one. So consecutive even integers and consecutive odd integers actually are the same formula. So it would be n times n plus 2. Whereas just consecutive integers, if it didn't say odd or even, would be n times n plus 1. Okay? Now let's solve this equation. Over here on the right, I'm going to erase the stuff in red because we don't need that for this problem. That was just to discuss consecutive even integers and how would you handle it if you had to. So back to our problem, I need to distribute this n inside the parentheses, so it's going to give me n squared plus 2n is equal to 99, right? Now we know this is a quadratic equation because it's got a square in it. And you know that all quadratic equations, your best bet is to get this equal to 0. So the next step is I'm going to subtract 99 from both sides of this equation. And if I go to the top of the page over here on the right, now I have n squared plus 2n minus 99 is equal to 0. Now if I can factor this, I will. If I can't factor this trinomial, then you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the quadratic formula. But this factors, I'm trying to find numbers that multiply to equal 99 and at the same time add to equal 2. And think about the first thing that pops in your head when you think multiply to be 99 is 11 and 9, right? And if I make the 11 positive and the 9 negative, that'll work for us because those two numbers add to be 2 and multiply to be negative 99. So when I factor, I have n plus 11 times n minus 9 equals 0. Then I set each one of these separately equal to 0. I subtract the 11, and I get an answer of n equals negative 11. I add the 9, and I get an answer of n is equal to 9. Now, I notice I got two different answers. So if I'm trying to find the integers, I really have two stories going on here. The first story, I could say if n is negative 11, okay, then the other number, it would be negative 99, right? If you check that, when you multiply those together, that gives you 99. So it checked. So that's one option for our two consecutive integers. The other option, think about this, would be 9, and the next number 9 in line is 11. And then 9 times 11, if you multiply those together, it gives you 99, right? So this has two different answers. Negative 11 and negative 9 are consecutive odd integers that multiply to be 99. And positive 9 and positive 11 are consecutive integers that multiply to be positive 99. All right, just to make you feel better, let's try this again. The product of two consecutive odd integers is 168. Find the integers. Hey, we know the story now, right? Two consecutive odd integers means n and n plus 2. Product means multiply. So if I multiply n times n plus 2, that's going to equal to 168. Now to simplify this, I need to distribute. I have n squared plus 2n is equal to 168. This is the point where I realize I have a quadratic equation because I have an n squared. So that means I need to get this equal to 0. I'm going to subtract 168 from each side of the equation. and that's going to give me n squared plus 2n subtract 168, and that's going to equal 0. Now what we need to do is we need to find two numbers that multiply to be negative 168 and also add to be positive 2. So I'm going to have to think about that for a minute. Now the numbers I've come up with are 12 and 14. So try that. So 12 times 14 does equal 168. And we know since it's negative, one is positive, one is negative. So it's going to be n plus the bigger one, right, times n minus 12 is equal to 0. And sometimes it takes a little while to do that. And again, if you don't like factoring, then the quadratic formula, which will present itself in these videos, will work just fine. You'll still get the correct answers. So now I do n plus 14 equals 0. That's one of my equations. And n minus 12 is equal to 0 is the other one. I subtract the 14 over and I get negative 14. And I add the 12 over and I get 12, not 112. Excuse me. I get just plain old 12. Okay? Now, that's not my answer. My answer is not negative 14 and 12. One of my answers is negative 14 is the consecutive. You know what? Something's wrong with this problem. Do you see what I see? And if I check my work, I think I've got it right. But these are not odd integers. This is a bad problem. And y'all, I got this right out of the book. So I need to write the folks and tell them that this must be even. Right? This is two consecutive even integers. And remember on the page before, I suggested that this problem works the same way if it says consecutive even or consecutive odd. But these numbers I found down here, these aren't odd numbers. These are even numbers that work. And that doesn't mean I did it wrong. It actually means that the question should have said even instead of odd. But again, I copied this right out of your textbook. They had some good examples in there, and I thought I would use them. So here we go. The first answer, if n is 14, and I list the consecutive integers, it would be negative 14 and negative 12, right? That's one set that would work. Multiply negative 14 times 12 in your calculator times negative 12, and that gives you positive, if I multiply this out, that gives you positive 168. The other answer would be 12 and 14, both positive. If I multiply those together, I also get positive 168. Okay? All right, for our third problem, find the dimensions of a triangle whose width is 4 more than 6 times its height and has an area of 200 square inches. Okay, I know it's a lot. You got to read it again. First of all, let's think about this, though. If we could draw a picture, maybe that would help. So we know we have a triangle, right? There's our triangle. And it talks about the width and it talks about the height. And you have to know a little bit of geometry to know this, but the width we also call the base, but I'm going to call the width W, okay, and then the height is this line right here that is perpendicular with the base or perpendicular with the width. So this is your height, okay. Now it tells us a lot more than that. It tells us that the width is 4 more than 6 times the height. So let's write this down. The width is 4 more than is just add, 6 times the height. So 6 times the height. So width is equal to 4 plus 6h. And height is just the height. We're going to leave that as h. Now it says it has an area of 208 square inches. Now here's something else you got to know, a little bit of geometry. The area of a triangle, you should all know this. We all memorize it as 1/2 the base times the height. But we called it width, and so did they. So another way to say that is 1/2 the width times the height. Now we're going to use that bottom equation, this equation down at the bottom here, to write our equation that we have to solve. So area, notice they said that's 208. So I know I have 208 is equal to 1/2. Now the width, I'm not going to use W. I'm going to use what it is, which is 4 plus 6h times the height is just h. Okay, so did you catch that? I substituted for W using 4 plus 6h, and I substituted for h using exactly what we called h, which is h. Now, the reason we can solve this equation is because we only have one variable. We wrote our width in terms of our height. So both the width and the height have h's in it, and that's your goal. Now, you just got to do the math to solve this. A lot of people get disturbed by this 1/2 in front here. There's two ways you can handle it, folks. What I could do immediately, and I will do this, I could just multiply both sides by 2, and that 2 cancels with that 2, and we're good to go. That way you don't have to worry about the 1/2. The other option is I could distribute the 1/2 inside the parentheses, so 1/2 times 4 is 2, and 1/2 times 6h is 3h. Then you distribute the h in. But the thing is, what if your 4 and your 6, they weren't even numbers? And so then you'd have fractions. So the first way I'm showing you here by multiplying both sides by 2 kind of eliminates the idea that you might could end up with fractions. All right. Now 2 times 208 we know is 416 equals, the 1/2's gone, right? Now I'm going to distribute this h inside, so I have 4h plus 6h squared. Keyword here again is squared. Once again, I have a quadratic equation. Quadratic equations need to be equal to 0, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 416 from both sides of my equation, or from each side, so I have 0 equals. Now, here's another thing. It'd help a lot if this was written in order. So I have 6h squared plus 4h minus 416. So this is in descending order, which makes it much easier to factor. Now, does this factor? Okay, I'm going to change my pen to smaller so I can fit it all on here. You have options here. A lot of you don't like to factor with these really big numbers, and it's probably something to contend with. If you want to, we can just go ahead and use the quadratic formula. You got to know how anyway. Why not? Let's do it. Y'all know the quadratic formula. I'm going to write it over here in red just to remind you. Okay, and it is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. It's all underneath the square root over 2a. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be using. My a is 6, my b is 4, and my c is negative 416. So I have, instead of x equals, I have h equals, because that's the variable I'm working with, negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 416, and that's all divided by 2 times 6. I simplify, so I have h equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16, and I multiply 4 times 6 times 416, and I get a big number, and it's a positive big number because this negative times negative is plus, and that's 9,984, all divided by 12. I continue to have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 9,984 gives me 10,000. Now 10,000 is a perfect square, which y'all, what that tells me is, and I'm going to finish it right over here, that tells me that I could have factored this to start with. And we talked about that, right? That it probably would factor. I just didn't want to. Okay? So, notice when I took the square root of 10,000, I don't write the square root symbol anymore. Now I have two separate problems. I have negative 4 plus 100 over 12. And I have negative 4 minus 100 over 12. Negative 4 plus 100 is going to be 96 over 12. And 96 divided by 12, you all know this is 8. Okay. Over here, now watch this, I've got negative 104 divided by 12. Now, you agree that's a negative number, right? We're looking for the height. The height of a triangle can never, ever be a negative number. So 8 is the height of our triangle. Okay, did you catch that? Now, sometimes both of your answers are valid, just like the last two problems we did. But sometimes one of your answers from your quadratic equation is not valid at all, because if you're finding the length of a side, a negative number is just not going to cut it. So 8 is the height. Okay, I'm going to write our answer in red. So 8 is the height. How do we find the width? Well, it's going to be 4 plus 6. Remember, h is our height, times 8. 6 times 8 is 48, plus 4 more is 52. Now, I've run myself all out of room to write this in a sentence, but we could say full sentence. The height of the triangle is 8. The width of the triangle is 52. And those are both in inches. Why do I know this? Because it said that the area was 208 square inches. So again, recap, our height is 8 inches, our width is 52 inches.